Hi everyone. We'll get started. Thanks for joining us this evening. If you didn't know from the event description, tonight's event is just a short presentation about indoor plants, and this week's topic is on aroids. And then usually what we do with these events is we then have a Q&A at the end of it. Yeah, we'll jump right into it. And before we begin, I'd just like to begin by acknowledging and paying my respects to the Wurundjeri people, who are the traditional custodians of the land from which I'm joining this meeting today. And I would also like to acknowledge and pay my respects to traditional custodians of all the places from which people are joining this meeting today. And I would like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. It wouldn't be a Zoom call without a few tech issues at the start. So like I said, this week's presentation is on aroids, and I'll talk about what they are, why we all actually know a fair bit about them if we've got any indoor plants, and some of the characteristics about them, and then also what some of the most popular aroids are. So firstly, what is an aroid? They're plants from the Aroids family, and there's actually quite a lot of them which are amongst the most popular indoor plants. So monsteras, devil's ivies, which are also known as pothos in some parts of the world, usually America, alocasias, peace lilies, and philodendrons, and quite a few other plants. They all fall under that family, so all of those are aroids. And there's a lot of variety in them. They occur naturally all over the world on every continent except Antarctica, and there's thousands of cultivars out there, so they're a really popular plant for collectors. They have a few characteristics which they all share being in the same family, and one of the big one is that most of them are, well, low light plants, and that doesn't mean that they like low light, but it means that they can survive in low light and sometimes do okay in low light, which is the main reason why they're a really, really popular indoor plant. They don't need to be out in the sun, although some do require full sunlight. They're all herbaceous perennials, so they're not woody plants, and they all grow for multiple seasons. And most aroids have this similar flower as a spadix, and you can see a picture of that on the slide there. The spadix is actually the bit in the middle sticking out, and it's surrounded by a spathe, which is that white sheath. And it's not a single flower, it's a cluster of flowers on that spadix, so many, many little flowers. The one that I'm showing here is a peace lily, and they're in the same family. Monsteras have very similar flowers, most of the aroids do. And something really cool and quite unique about aroids is that some of them, not many, but some of them have the ability to generate their own heat, which is a very rare quality in a plant. And they do this, they store energy in the form of sugars and carbohydrates in their roots or tubers, and then if they really need some heat in that flower, whether it's to help attract certain pollinators or to help it survive through a frost or a snow, then they can actually use some of that energy to produce heat out of the flower, which is very unique. They're a really good indoor plant, like I said, because of their low light requirement in order to survive. And they also, even though they come from different parts of the world, some very humid areas, some with really high temperatures or lower temperatures, most of them do well with what I would say is normal humidity and temperature. So what's normal for us indoors and our level of comfort. And they're also very beautiful, and there's a lot of varieties out there. And the variegated varieties are really, really popular. And one of the more expensive ways to collect plants is to collect variegated aroids or rare aroid species. There are people who sell these cuttings of these rare cultivars online for thousands of dollars. Sometimes people pay $10,000 or more for a single cutting. It's because they're hard to find, or they're very unique, or they have a really, really rare kind of variegation that's hard to reproduce. And the other reason that they're popular as an indoor plant is they're usually, not all of them, but most of them, very easy to propagate, and very easy to propagate in water. There's a few popular aroids, which if you've got indoor plants, there's a good chance you've got one of them in your collection. If you don't, then you've probably seen it in someone else's house. I think the most popular one is the Monstera deliciosa, which is what people usually call Monstera, or sometimes people call it a fruit salad plant. That's the one in the middle you see the most in nurseries and Bunnings. And something that not many people know, but is that Monsteras produce their own fruit. In fact, many plants do. Monsteras produce this fruit, which apparently, I've never eaten it, but apparently it has a bit of a pineapple-y, peary type taste. And something really important is you only eat the very, very ripe fruit. If it's unripe or slightly ripe, it's full of some nasties that give you a tummy ache, basically. Monsteras are a good plant to show the difference between these plants being indoors, where they often do well, and being outdoors, where they're actually in their favourite environment. So indoors, the Monstera will usually look like the picture on the left, a little bit leggier, lengthier, thinner stem, leaves that are more spread out, and they're really reaching out on really long petioles. And then often it'll take time and age and a bit more sunlight, they'll develop a lot of those fenestrations. If you've got a Monstera outside, it's much more likely to grow really, really big leaves pretty quickly, really, really big fenestrations, which is the holes in them, and much, much bigger leaves. And also they appear a lot bushier. So it's okay to have them indoors or outdoors. You can see the difference between a plant which strives outdoors, survives. Easy to pick different varieties out there. All of the ones shown in that picture are variegated, but they're more common ones, not necessarily too expensive to buy. And they like to climb up a pole or trail down. Another reason they're really popular is they're great for hanging baskets. Philodendrons, there's 1,001 cultivars out there, philodendron. They look really, really different. They have a few similar characteristics, philodendrons, but often you could find two philodendrons which you wouldn't guess they're in the same family at all, let alone they're both philodendrons. On the left in this slide is a really, really popular one. It's Philodendron micans. And it's got this really nice light veins and a kind of furry leaf surface, which makes it quite popular. The one in the middle is Philodendron Xanadu, which again, outside grows really, really a lot bigger leaves, a lot bushier. Inside it kind of grows a sparser habit. I've included these pictures because it's something really cool that I didn't know any plant did. This particular philodendron does. This is Philodendron squamiferum, or hairy stemmed philodendron. Sometimes it's called red hairy stemmed philodendron. The new leaves have these pink stems with really short, soft hairs. Not actually hairs, kind of like fleshy little. Look, the best way to describe them is hairs, but they're not like the furry surface of a plant. And as that leaf gets older and more mature and unfurls, the colour of the stem changes from red to green, and the hairs get thicker and spread out, and they're much more further apart. In the middle picture, you can see that red young stem, and then just below that is a mature stem. So that's a fully grown, fully unfurled leaf. Monstera dancini, it's usually sold as Swiss cheese plant. Another really, really popular one, easy to propagate, really popular for trailing and hanging pots. And yeah, there's a few different varieties out there that look like this, so that have these holes. The most popular one in terms of the most widely sold would be Monstera dancini, or Danson's Monstera. This is a dancini, which I included it because I wanted to show what can happen when you have different light for the plant in the same, both indoors and also different soils. The plant on the left is one that I bought from a nursery, grew it in water for a while, and then in a really big pot with really nice potting mix. And it's got really, really nice leaves. It's growing really fast. The leaves are really big, and the windows in those leaves are really, really big compared to the total surface area of the leaves. So what that tells me is it's got good access to nutrients and water. That's one thing in the soil. But the big one is that it has enough sunlight that it doesn't need to worry about having a more sunlight. It has those really big holes. I took a cutting from that plant and propagated it, and that's what resulted in the plant on the right. And that's the exact same plant. The cutting had a leaf that was one of the big ones, and since then what's grown is a plant with much smaller leaves. Those leaves are maybe half the size of a phone screen, whereas the ones in the picture on the left are more like a bit bigger than my hand. It's in a different room where it gets less sunlight over the day, and it's also in a smaller pot. So it needs more leaf surface area to capture more light. So those holes in the leaves are smaller compared to the rest of the leaf. And it's also probably could do with a bigger pot or maybe better soil. So the stem's a little bit thinner and it's really climbing away. What that tells me is the plant's thinking, okay, I'm not exactly getting what I want here, not getting enough light, but if I reach around, grab onto a tree, or in this case, a wall, then maybe I can reach up higher and get to the sun. This is what aroids do in the wild. Well, aroids that climb or trail, they grow on the forest floor, and that's where they have their low light conditions that they're used to. But what they do is they crawl around looking for something to grab onto and climb up. So quite often they'll climb up a tree, heading to the canopy to get to the higher sunlight. And that's exactly what they're trying to do as well when they're indoors. Alocasias are another really popular aroid. They can grow really, really big leaves. They're usually sold as taro or giant taro, elephant ears plants. Again, there's a lot of different cultivars out there. Some of them look quite different. All of them fall under that alocasia group, which is a cousin of the colocasia group, which is a more popular outdoor plant, more popular in wetter soils. Alocasias are really, really soft. They have, in terms of being herbaceous perennial, like all other aroids, the word herbaceous best applies in this case. Alocasias have really soft, juicy stems. Even though they're kind of brittle, you can snap them off. You can really see that the plant is entirely made up of that soft tissue. We have an aroid at the office in Farmwall, and what we wanted to do is see how well it would grow in one of our fish tanks. This is in an ecosystem fish tank. The ecosystem is a product that Farmwall sells where you grow microgreens or indoor plants aquaponically on a fish tank, and also grow produce and plants hydroponically. We put the alocasia in the before picture. That's just after it came out of its pot from Bunnings. Took it out of the soil, rinsed the roots, and then just stuck it in those clay balls so the roots could then grow down into the fish tank water. That water's full of nutrients from all the fish waste, and on top of that, we added a bit of our indoor plant food, which is a bioactivated fertilizer. We used that to enrich the water and see how it would help the plants grow. It's kind of hard to see, but in the after picture, you can see that same plant has much thicker stem, and it's actually thick enough that it's probably about to break out of that pot. It's got many new leaves, and it's popping out about one new leaf every fortnight now. And they're really, really big, and they have a really nice, rich green color. There's no discoloration. It's not struggling for nutrients, and it's not got too many nutrients. So I just thought I'd include that. It's a good example of how alocasias can really suck up a lot of fertilizer, and also that they're pretty happy in water. The ZZ plant, it's often sold as Zanzibar gem, and there's a lot of different types. Some are really small, some are really big. This is unlike a lot of the other aroids. It prefers to actually have basically no water. If you ever get a ZZ plant, the best way to avoid killing it, never water it. They store everything they need in their tubers under the soil, and they're used to having really, really dry soil. They really struggle with wet soil. It makes that tuber rot, or sorry, the bulb rot really quickly, and then the plant dies. And if it's really desperate for moisture, what it'll do, it'll take it from the atmosphere. Here you can see those bulbs at the bottom of a ZZ plant. You can propagate them in water like this, but you can't keep them in water, and you definitely can't keep them in damp soil. And that's it. I included this picture myself, one, out of vanity, but two, because probably half the plants I have are aroids. You can see monsteras around there. You can see a few philodendrons. That's again in that picture are plants that I propagated from cuttings of bigger plants that I've got. So that's it. That's the end of the presentation. What we've been doing is we do these presentations and Q&As for our online community in our ecosystem learning portal. But what we're going to do, like we've done for tonight's presentation, is open some of them up to the public in the future. So we're at the Q&A section of the presentation. So if you've got any comments, questions, anything like that, then feel free to unmute yourself and ask away.
G'day, Patrick. Thanks so much for that. It was really, really interesting. It's Glenn here. I don't know if you can see me. And hello, everybody else. I had no idea that there were so many varieties all within that that family. Well, it's really, really cool. I've got a whole bunch at home, but I didn't know they were all related. So that was kind of cool to know.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a question about slightly different, about different plant species, but it's about a ficus that I have at home. And I'm just wondering about the best way to look after that particular like family, because we've got it. When I first got it a couple of years ago, it was, had leaves all the way up and it was really rich, but then slowly over time it started dropping off all the leaves at the bottom of it. And I've actually can probably show you. And so I moved it into a spot that's got a bit more light, but I don't know whether I'm overwatering it, whether it's getting too much or not enough light. It still seems to be sort of living, but it's just looking really sparse now. I'll just flip this.
Yeah.
I'll flip my screen over.
Well, it could be a number of reasons. If the leaves are discoloring before they drop off, then there's a good chance the roots are a bit too moist, and the roots are rotting.
Sorry.
Leaves drop or leaves curling and then discoloring and then dropping off. Usually the first thing I guess, especially if it's a plant in a pot without a hole in it, there's a good chance that there's too much moisture in the soil and those roots are rotting. I can see it there. It looks.
See how it's sort of like, so it was basically really thick and lush when we first got it, but you can kind of see it started to drop all these sort of lower leaves off over time, and now it's only got a few at the top. So I just don't know why it's looking so. And I've just been sort of checking it. Like we've got this little moisture meter. It's like it's moist down there. I don't think it's saturated. So yeah, I just don't know whether I should, next spring take it out and repot it and loosen up the roots and see what's going on, or whether it, whether you've got any advice about it.
Yeah, I would be surprised if it's light. Usually, so that looks like a Ficus elastica. Usually they do fine in moderate light or even low light, which is why they're a really popular office plant. I'm surprised. I mean, I'd be surprised if it was the light. It's hard to say what is usually the cure-all, if you don't really know, is to repot it. So definitely if you can get a really nice light aerated potting mix, or you can make one yourself, then yeah, I would take it out. Actually, like remove all the soil from the roots and have a look at the roots, and you can rinse them off with a hose or just brush them off. Have a look at the roots, see if they're a nice white color or if they're kind of brown. If they're brown, then they're not too happy. And then chuck them in some new soil and see how that goes. And then also double check that your pot's got a hole in it and that the water can drain out.
Thank you. They're great tips. Is there any point in time when I should look in terms of what season I should think about repotting? Like, is it best to do it in, if I sort of miss the boat, is it best to do it in winter before it turns into sort of spring, or do it now before spring happens? You know, what's the sort of best or least disruptive time to sort of start repotting?
Do it whenever you've got the time.
Yeah, okay.
It's, you know, yeah. So if it's an indoor plant, do it whenever you've got the time. Winter is more difficult. It might be a bit colder. And if you're watering it in, then there's a good chance the water coming out of the tap is a lot colder because the pipes outside are colder. So winter could be tougher for the plant, but in general, if it's an indoor plant and you're comfortable indoors, your plant should also be comfortable enough to be repotted.
Thank you. Thank you. I've got one other question too around monsteras, but I'll might save that because I don't want to hog the Q&A. So I'm going to shut up now for a second, and you can come back to me later.
Go for it. It's what we're here for.
Would anyone else like to jump in? Otherwise, I've got, yeah, please. Okay, looks like it's me still. I was wondering about the propagation of monsteras. I'm just going to show you a couple of the things that I got going on at home. And I wondered about when it's, or how you actually start to propagate them, because I got a couple of, like a mature one and one that's a bit smaller. And I just would like to sort of show you and see if you can maybe give me a tip about, first of all, whether they could be propagated, or when to sort of know and how to do that if they are ready. So I've got this like pretty nice looking, pretty mature one. It's got a nice like little guy unfurling here. So I just don't know whether there's, you know, it's ready at all. It seems like it's all off one kind of vine, whether, you know, there's any propagation possibility with that guy, or whether.
Yeah, there definitely is. There's a couple of different ways to do it. What I might do, I'll grab a monstera from behind me because I might point at where's a good place to cut. So just bear with me.
Thanks.
So this isn't a dancing eye. Hopefully you guys can see that. It's a bit different to the Monstera deliciosa you've got, but the principle for propagation will be the same. What you'll see on the Monstera, it'll be a lot closer together on the Monstera, but there's basically a stem and then a leaf node, stem and then a leaf node. And usually those roots will be coming out right near the leaf node, maybe behind it or just next to it. To take a cutting, this applies for this plant, also your plant. You can snip it just before the node and just after the node, and then that is your cutting there. And that's the bit that you either put in soil or you can put it in water and let the root grow a bit more, and then put it in soil. That's one way to do it. Sometimes with monsteras, and it looks like yours is really, really fat and healthy. Sometimes it's hard to get, you know, the space there and there between the leaves. What you can do is two different things. One thing that people do, which is really popular, I'll get that out of the way, is to, if you've got an aerial root and the plant is sticking out of its pot, you can put a pot right next to it and try and tie it down to a new pot. And then the section of the stem, which is sitting on the new soil, will grow its root into that. Once that's grown in and your plant's basically straddling two pots, you can new one is established. And then the other thing is air layering, which is kind of like harder, I guess. But your chance of success is much, much higher. I'll explain it briefly, and then it's probably the kind of thing it would be better to Google and read about. But air layering is basically where you find that spot where the root is. So for example, if I was doing it at this node, I actually wouldn't. I would do it at this node here. What I would do is put sphagnum moss or soil around that and hold it in place with Glad wrap. So wrap Glad wrap around it. Or you can buy online now these things that are made specifically for this. They're like plastic clips, like balls and you put the sphagnum moss or the soil in there and you clip it around the stem. That'll then cause that root to grow into that medium, whether it's the sphagnum moss or the soil. And once that's done, then you can snip behind the node and above the node, and that's already established. You can just plant it straight into soil. So you've got a few options. Air layering is a popular one, especially for outdoor plants and woody plants. But sorry about that.
Awesome. Sorry, I think I just lost you for a second, Patrick. Sorry if I'm speaking over you or anybody else. Don't know if it's my lag or not.
No, all good. All good.
Awesome. Thank you.
For a bit.
That's super cool. So can I just show you one? I've got another plant as well, same thing, but a slightly smaller one on the mantelpiece. So if I was wanting to propagate this guy, could I can see a little sort of node, I think here. I don't know if you can see my little camera screen. Would I, in a sense, just kind of chop about there, like just underneath it, and just stick this new bit in soil or in the aquaponics unit? Would that would that work? So I could just kind of grab that bit, and then I'd have these two leaves, quite long ones, just as a separate piece.
That's exactly it. Yeah, and then you can stick that right in water and just make sure that the root is touching the water or in the water.
Yep.
And it'll love it. I've done exactly that with some of my monsteras before, and we've also done it at the farm wall office before, and they love it. If you're propagating like many cuttings from a plant, usually that tip cutting isn't the best. You want some of the ones which are in the intermediate. But that one I think will definitely be fine. And Monstera deliciosa usually copes pretty well regardless of where you take the cutting from. So yeah, definitely go for it, I think. And look, the other great thing about it is that once you've taken that cutting, the Monstera that you cut it off will likely produce new growth tips from down the stem at other leaf nodes. Just like how you prune a plant makes it really bushy, taking a cutting from a plant, which is the exact same as pruning it, will trigger it into pushing out some new growth tips. So it's a good way to make your Monstera a lot more bushy as well, is to keep taking cuttings from it, provided you leave a few nodes always on the original plant.
That's super helpful. Thank you. I didn't have the confidence just to kind of chop it up in case I ruined it. So thank you for the for the tip. I'll give it a try. That's awesome. Thanks, Pat.
Sometimes you got to take the plunge.
Yeah.
It feels scary, and you know, there are people out there with the rare varieties that cost thousands of dollars, and I don't think I'd have it in me to take cuttings or to buy one of those cuttings and risk it dying. But yeah, some people view it as an investment. It's pretty high risk, even for an experienced horticulturalist, in my opinion. But yeah, people do it and they do it really well. It's quite amazing.
Absolutely. Nice one.
Cool. Are there any more questions or comments, or does anyone have any plans they just want to share, show and tell? Nice, Emily. That looks amazing. Some nice trailing plants, and yeah, cool. Well, yeah, if no one else has anything to ask or say, then I think we can wrap it up. Thanks everyone for joining us. Like I said, we usually do these events to people in the Farm Wall online community, but every now and then we'll open them up to the public, and it's really great to see some outside interest and people coming in. And if you'd like to join the Farm Wall online community, it's called Ecosystem, and if you go to farmwall.com, you can Ecosystem Network. Yeah. Good night, everyone. See ya.